Not going to say it. We got a nickname for him, but he's the head of content over at Daily Faceoff. So, Frank, where are you? Oh, you're in Vegas.
Where else would I be, Quads?
That took me a second. So, how did you like all the traveling for the Cup final?
It was a long playoff run. Obviously, I spent the first 2 rounds with you guys in Van, did the 3rd round in Edmonton, and then the Cup final back and forth 31,000 miles just in the Cup final. It was a slog, but honestly, iconic Cup final, one of the best I've ever covered, maybe one of the best I'll ever cover. And that Game 7, the anticipation heading into it, such a consequential game given how the series turned out. Maybe one of the more consequential NHL games I'll ever be in the building for.
As you kind of reflect on it a bit, what was the biggest thing you'll take away from these playoffs and from the Cup final?
Actually, Harm just hit on one of them, and that was really how the referees put their whistles away. Certainly in Game 7, we knew that was going to be the case when the 2 guys were named to call the game. I thought that was hugely beneficial for the Panthers. And it's also, that's not really anything new either. Like statistically, it's been covered of how the later a series goes, the fewer penalty calls there are. The later a playoffs go from round 1 to 4, the fewer calls there are. And that hurts for a team like Edmonton that had been so lethal on the power play and just had a really odd playoff run on the power play. Like at varying points, they were the Harlem Globetrotters, or on the other pole, they were a team that, couldn't score into the ocean and were 1 for 16 stretches, which is kind of hard to believe. But they were scoring 3 goals a game against the Kings multiple times on the power play in round 1. So that part was odd. Another takeaway, just the power of size. The Canucks know that with Zadorov and Myers. They believe it. And Rick Tocchet is definitely a believer based on his deployment of Myers and Zadorov. And I know I just pronounced his name differently twice, but I'm trying to key in on that. I'm going to try and say Zadorov because I think that's the correct one.
Yeah.
Frank, shifting to the Canucks, as you already kind of did there, wanted to start with Jake Guentzel. I feel like every Canucks fan has him penciled in as this is our dream acquisition. What do you expect the market for Guentzel to look like, and how would you peg Vancouver's odds of winning those sweepstakes?
Well, I think the Canucks have also penciled him in as their dream acquisition on the free agent market. So that part is clear. He's got to make it there. And I think what you'd have to guard against if you're the Canucks, and maybe not much you can do, is does someone step up in the meantime and try and trade for his rights? No guarantee that he ends up signing with whoever trades for him. And we've actually seen that happen before, believe it or not. I covered the Philadelphia Flyers when they traded for Dan Hamhuis's rights, a Vancouver connection, of course. And then they weren't able to get a deal done and sign him, which is kind of funny.
What did they give up for him? I don't remember that trade.
Yeah, sometimes that happens because you don't remember it because he didn't end up signing there and never played for them. That's why you don't remember it.
I got to look up what the return on that trade was. Like, did they give up significant assets?
No, I don't think so.
3rd round pick. It was a 3rd round pick.
Yeah. So, anyway, when it comes to Guentzel, they've got their sights set on him. And I think if they can make it work and pull it off, I do think there's a real path for them to sign Guentzel, sign Zadorov, sign Myers, and then give whatever is left over to Artur Shilovs if they can try and make all of those things happen. They're walking a tightrope, and they're scrounging in couch cushions for coins, but it also requires moving Ilya Mikheyev and biting that bullet. Will they do that between now and then?
Okay, lots to dive into there. You brought up Shilovs, you brought up Zadorov. We have a lot to talk about. Let's start with moving Mikheyev, because as you just said, it's going to have to maybe happen if you want to get all of that work done. We saw Jake Wallman go yesterday. Jake Wallman's a pretty good player. He's got a lesser cap hit than Ilya Mikheyev. It's going to cost at least a 1st round pick to move Ilya Mikheyev on the trade market. Do you think it's going to cost more than that?
I'm going to say no, it's not going to cost a 1st round pick to move Mikheyev.
Not going to cost a 1st round pick. Okay. Why do you say that?
Because the Jake Wallman deal yesterday is going to end up being an outlier. That's what I truly believe. A bunch of teams were surprised that that's what the cost ended up being. In fact, they knew or had an inkling that Wallman was available, but were never presented a world in which they were able to make an offer. There wasn't a bidding war, so to speak, of who ends up paying the least to sweeten the pot. That never happened. And because that never happened, and because everyone really seemed to be surprised by it, at least in terms of the price paid, I don't think that does anything in my eyes to set the market for what that might mean for Mikheyev. I think they're looking at a very similar package. It's second round pick in order to take him on. But I also, I think there's enough teams that are moderately intrigued by him that if push really comes to shove, that there's a deal to be had there. It's still going to involve something. Like, I don't think anyone's just taking him on for free, because it's been known for a while that that option is available. The question is, will the Canucks be desperate enough with all of these other things coming together to want to do that? I think it's a possibility, but it's all going to depend to start on Guentzel.
Can I just ask you about Guentzel? Like, were you gonna ask about Guentzel? Because that's the thing I'm really curious about, is when it comes to working out something with Guentzel, is it more of a, okay, we're going to make sure that we have the highest bid, or is there a limit to what the Canucks want to do? Because they're like, okay, well, we have to do the other stuff as well. Like, how serious are the Canucks about this?
I know the Canucks aren't going to $10 million. So that is probably a non-starter. That's actually the doorbell to my room ringing. I know the Canucks are not getting to 10. However, I think they're solidly somewhere in between 9 and 10. And the fact that they would have to do 7 years, most likely, unless they can work out a sign and then trade with the Hurricanes, that my prediction, my guess is, if he is in Vancouver, is that it'll be somewhere right in that range, real close to 7 times 9.5, that provides them enough of a buffer between whatever the Canes were offering with the 8th year and what the market would bear with the 7th year, to have both a really competitive offer, but also a competitive team and some familiar faces around Jake Guentzel that would make all three of those things make it really appealing.
Who do you think some of Vancouver's plan B targets might be, whether it's on the free agent market or on the trade market, for a top 6 forward if they strike out on Guentzel?
It's a hard question to answer. I don't know what their plan B is. I just know their plan A. Does a Marty, is it possible to go back and circle back to the Marty Necas conversation? I don't think they're kind of in the authentic list of the last 3 to 5 candidates to land Necas, but I think they're probably keeping close tabs on it just in case. And I do think he also has some potential game-breaking, genes in his arsenal that I think would make it really intriguing from a Vancouver perspective. I also just don't think they have the wherewithal or assets to get it done.
Frank, why hasn't a contract been done with Archer Shilovs yet?
Well, because of all the things I just mentioned. You can't go out and pay your goalie and then take away from money that you might ultimately need when you have Thatcher Demko, and you could probably just find anyone. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely does. I'm leading into the offer sheet conversation because you made waves when you talked on Scaris and Price about the idea of a team offer sheeting Archer Shilovs. Frank, I wrote about it at Canucks Army today, and I'm going to read you a comment from one of the readers, because when I wrote about it, I was talking about how, yeah, this is a thing that absolutely could happen. Offer sheets don't happen often. They definitely don't happen often for goalies. The last goalie to get offer sheeted was Arturs Urbe, who also once said that he thinks Archer Shilovs is going to win the Canucks a cup, but that's beside the point. This was the comment. I have to find it. Sorry. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, Yeah, this might be a slightly more serious concern than you're giving credit to. A lot of teams in the league are really desperate for a goaltending upgrade, and some of them have a lot more cap flexibility than the Canucks. If a team like Utah, Detroit, or Chicago, all of whom have lots of cap space to work with, rolled out a 3-year, $3 million offer to Shilovs, could the Canucks honestly afford to match that? If not, they would just get the paltry compensation of a second-round pick, which is a fairly unappealing return for a guy they clearly like. He went on. That's Chris the curmudgeon from the Canucks Army comment section. But is he on to something there?
100%. I actually don't think it would take even $3 million for the Canucks to not match it. Depending on the timing of this and the dominoes and the order in which they'd fall, I think even getting Shilovs to $2 million is going to be a stretch for them to pull off. And I don't know that obviously they like him for sure, but they're not going to take a backup goalie even at his young age and prioritize him over any one of the guys that I just mentioned in Guentzel,
Yep.
Zadorov, or even Tyler Myers. And I can't fault them for that. That's how I view it, which is why I think he's the one offer sheet candidate that they should be concerned about and should be susceptible to, because exactly that. It's the compensation is even less when you get to $2 million. If I don't have the sheet in front of me, what's the compensation for $2 million?
It's a third round pick.
And what's it for $1.99 million?
Third round pick. The range is 1.5 to 2.7 or 2.8.
Okay, so like third round pick, like that might be all you have to give up to get him. But theoretically, unless the Canucks get a deal done, like the timing of this is super interesting because they'd need to get a deal done with Guentzel real fast, get a deal done with Zadorov. Like, so if you're thinking about the pecking order and how this timing wise would need to play out, they need to have some kind of reasonable assurance that they can land Guentzel. Then they need to go back to Zadorov and hammer out a deal before he makes it to market. Give whatever's left over after all three of those things to Tyler Myers. And then after all those things are done, once you get Guentzel done, then go back to Shilovs and say, here's what we can give you. Please hurry up and sign on the dotted line before you can sign an offer sheet from someone else. Unless I'm missing something. That's how I view the timeline.
Yep.
Going back to Zadorov there a little bit, what's the latest you've been hearing on him, and how likely do you think it is that he'll remain a Canuck for next season?
I think the interest is there. I think this is a giant game of chicken, Harm. I think as much as the Zadorov camp wants to talk tough, you can say what you want about what you want to get. But if you don't take what's on the table for you, you better go out and then over deliver on the other end on the market. And I've said this to you guys from the very beginning. I know that Zadorov thinks or wants and has tried to wish it into the ether by speaking it into the universe that he's a top pair defenseman. He just isn't. I think there's too many teams uniformly around the NHL, now potentially staring down his sixth different team that know that that's not the case. And, you can want and say what the market is, but you better deliver if you walk. Think back to another situation that played out. Same agent, Dan Milstein, with Evander Kane and the Oilers. Said, I'm going to go to market. I can get way more than this based on the way that I played in the playoffs. And he had to come back, tail between his legs, and do the deal with the Oilers, because the 4-year deal, because that was the best offer that was on the table. So this is how it works when it comes to free agency. Like, I could want to be 170 pounds and have 2 Swedish models for girlfriends and drive a Ferrari and have all these things. All the wants and wishes and everything are great. But no matter how many times you speak it into the ether, that they don't just materialize. And Nikita Zadorov doesn't just wake up on the eve of free agency and start to get paid like a top pair defenseman.
What's your prediction for what he signs on July 1?
I'm going to answer it from my perspective because I don't know how to predict it.
Mhm.
because it only ever takes one team, and that's the other part of it. Maybe they have one team that they know is going to do it, and maybe that's what they're leveraging the Canucks on. But since he wants to be there, I would be comfortable signing him to 6 times 4.75.
Yeah.
Maybe 6 times 5.
Yeah. I think I was high in my I wrote an article about what each guy was get on their next deal, and I had Zadorov pretty high. I think I had a 6x5 on the open market.
Yeah, but like I think sub $5 million is fine. And I'd be willing to stretch a little bit on term because I don't think he's going to age poorly. Big guys generally don't. Look at Tyler Myers. People were griping about that contract at the beginning, and now you're like, oh, I'd like to see more of him.
Mm-hmm. Quad's new.
If they do miss out on Zadorov, is there a number 4 or 5 defenseman that you think they might covet on the free agent market as a sort of check down option, maybe like a Brendan Dillon or Joel Edmondson?
I could see Brendan Dillon for sure. That would make a ton of sense and fit. Joel Edmondson, the physicality is great, but I don't think he moves as well as Dillon. That's just my own personal opinion. I could see them being in that market in that range. I don't think they'd be as impactful or effective as Zadorov, but sometimes, you can't get everything in one summer, which is really what the Canucks are trying to accomplish with the laundry list of names that we've talked about.
Frank, thanks so much for doing this. I'm going to leave it open to you. These rule changes, anything you want to talk about before you depart?
No, I'm just looking forward to seeing how this draft board shakes down on Friday night. I think this is going to be one of the most fascinating first rounds we've seen in years. You've got a great player in Macklin Celebrini at 1. Does the draft really start at 2 or does it start at 4? How many top 10 picks will end up being on the move? Because this draft, maybe more than most that we've covered, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And there's a bunch of teams that if they see the board fall a certain way, they're like, I'm going to trade down. Like, I don't have to pick here. I could probably get the same guy 5 or 8 picks later. And there's going to be a real interesting value proposition for a couple teams.
I'm looking forward to it. I think we're just going to see some more movement. Teams have money now. It's going to be a fun off season. And unfortunately, it started on June 25th. So anyways, Franks, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
See you guys.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.